it's always puzzling, this kind of, it's what sort of, the more you get engaged in social psychology, the more frustrating the world becomes because it fails to sort of live up to your. But the other part of this is, and you touch on this, there's a section, a paragraph that you talk about, in which you talk about this on the end of your book, and I want to read 2 sentences of it. And you're sort of thinking about all the work that you've described. And you say, these studies tell us something profound and perhaps a bit disturbing about what makes us who we are. There isn't a single version of you. When you're surrounded by litter, you're more likely to be a litter bug. When you're walking past buildings with broken windows, you're more likely to disrespect the property that surrounds you, on and on and on. That notion that there isn't a single version of you is the most subversive thing in the book, because, and it's the thing that we cling to. How many conversations have all of us had in which we talked about what the kind of person that we are, right? But in fact, what you're saying is, well, if you properly take into account these environmental influences, it becomes very hard to know the kind of person that you are.
Yeah, I think there's an anchor, and so we have. You can say that this person is different from this other person in certain ways. I think what happens though is we deviate from that anchor depending on what's going on around us. So there is no single version of you, but you will be different from someone else. It's not like everyone in the presence of litter becomes that same person. I think you all have an anchor and then you deviate from the anchor. But I think that's the most radical and extreme version of social psychology. It's the suggestion that your surroundings, the situation, is everything. And without the situation, you are effectively, it's impossible to say what kind of a person you are. Yeah. You could never perceive a person in a vacuum. If you put them in a vacuum in space somewhere where there's nothing to see, of course I show that even the color black, which you'd see in space, affects you. So it's very hard to imagine a situation where you're totally unaffected. But these situational effects are so powerful that at their extreme, you are no one until you know what that situation is doing to you.
Yeah.
But that's it is disturbing.
That's the sort of the ultimate fiction of our lives, right? That we spend an awful lot of time creating a sort of mythological identity for ourselves that's in defiance of the facts.
Yeah, it's a very strong way of putting it, because that, I think, denies that anchor. I think that anchor is real and it's very important. But I think what we don't recognize is how far we deviate from the anchor. So it's not like we are just sort of doing a little dance around the anchor. In the right setting, we are completely different people. People can't believe that they'll react in certain ways when they read about certain experiments in social psychology, but when they're exposed to them.
If you can get a long way from the anchor, it's not an anchor anymore, right? I mean,
let's call it anchorish.
Anchorish.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, the other way to put it is simply that those who appear to be consistent are those who have managed to control their environmental influences. My father is of someone who is profoundly consistent, and that's because he lives his life in a band that narrow, right? He has succeeded in conquering all sources of inconsistency, and so that's, put that way, my father is no more a single person than the rest of us. He's just sort of honorary enough to have blocked out all of the contrary influences.
Yeah, maybe. And I think that also raises a very interesting question, which is it better to be a single person? It is unsettling to think that we aren't a single person, but it may also be the healthiest way to be and the happiest way to be. So yes, you're being buffeted by the fact that there's litter here or a broken window there or the wall happens to be painted pink, but maybe that's okay. It might actually be better to be that way than to be narrow and rigid and to try and fight all of these effects.